Hello, 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 everybody. It is time for my Susie L. McMahon's virtual book club. Tonight, I am so excited to be able to chat with Melissa again, joining us as a co-host, and also our featured author and my neighbor from Fripp Island, John Pruitt. Welcome to the virtual book club tonight. How's everybody doing?
Yeah, great here in Greenville.
And John, what's it like in Fripp tonight?
Beautiful, beautiful. The New Year's crowd has departed. The island is virtually empty, and the beaches are clear and wonderful. So, and as you know, Susie, it's a nice place to be anytime.
Absolutely. I was just thinking that today and sent off a few text messages to friends in the Beaufort area. And no offense to Florida, but South Carolina, we've got Florida beat.
I think so.
It's just too busy. But if for all of you that are joining us tonight, make sure to tell us where you're viewing from, and also let us know your name if you have not granted StreamYard permission to use your name. Otherwise, you come across as Facebook user, and it's hard to personalize the conversation. But I was going to start by reading John's bio from the back of from the inside cover of his wonderful novel that we're discussing tonight, Tell It True by John Pruitt. John Pruitt began his journalism career in 1964 as a television reporter, cameraman, and eventually rose to the top at WSB-TV in Atlanta, Georgia. For half a century, he covered the civil rights movement, Georgia politics, and the major news figures of the day. His reporting has been honored with multiple awards, including the induction into the Atlanta Press Club and Georgia's Association of Broadcasters Hall of Fame. I know he's a father, a grandfather, and he has several dogs, furry friends, correct? Welcome, John.
Thank you. What a pleasure to be here to talk about Tell It True.
No, I'm so excited. So I want to welcome Janet McCauley watching from St. Helena so far, and I'll welcome y'all in the comments from here on out. Melissa, let's get started right away. Do you have a question for John tonight?
I do. I have many questions, so it's difficult to choose the first one, but rolling it out, when did you decide to write this book?
Well, it's actually something I've been working on for decades. Having been in journalism for 50 years, covering news in Atlanta the entire time, which is unusual for a television journalist. They're normally an itinerant breed, but I stayed put. It happened to be the town I grew up in. So I had a real bond with the city and an understanding, I believe, of the history of the city. And looking back, I knew I was going to write a novel. From my earliest days in college, I said, I'm going to write a novel. It just took me a while to get around to it. But I knew the topic would be Atlanta and Georgia and the South in general in the 60s, because it was such a formative time for not only the region, but for the country and the world, the civil rights movement, which was my entree into journalism as a young photojournalist who had no journalistic background, no training at all. But I was thrust into covering it, and it was exciting, thrilling, scary. But I knew that that would be the topic of my novel when I got around to it. And over a number of years, I worked on it, but it wasn't until I retired that I could really devote full time to it. I feel there's a lot of need for people to understand what happened in the civil rights movement. In speaking to a lot of young people, and I did that a lot when I was in television news, I realized that young people, black and white, had very little understanding of what life under segregation was like for black folk and for white folk. And I felt a sense of mission to try to recapture that time, which was a painful time, but also a time of great excitement because the world was changing, and to put that into a novel. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, but that was the genesis of the idea, which persisted for many, many years, decades, even until I finally finished Tell It True.
Well, I'm so grateful that you did.
Sorry for the interruption. I ordered dinner for later, but it's here now. So we just got to roll with the punches, don't we? Anyway, so luckily it's just my virtual book club and not the live newscast. Now, I have to do full disclosure as a follow-up. John, I grew up in Atlanta from, let's see, probably 1969 or 1970. So I grew up listening to you tell us the news with my parents in the family
I don't
room.
remember you telling me that, Susie. That's
I
very
don't know if I
touching.
did tell you that.
I
So
don't think you did. Thank you.
so it was interesting when I met you in the driveway and you're walking your dogs. I was like, "Yep, that's that voice." That's for sure.
You
Anyway,
knew who I
so
was. That was great.
sort of. But I know that when you wrote your novel, part of the process is to go around to other honorable people or other authors and have them write blurbs. But I know that there was one from a very significant civil rights activist and our former mayor and UN, Mr. Andrew Young, wrote such a blurb that it's your afterword. Can you tell me how that all came about?
I'd be happy to. As you correctly say, any author publishing a novel or a book needs to have well-known people say something nice about it. And I had some good friends who were writers who did that. And I thought maybe why not give it a shot? I've covered Andy Young, Reverend Andrew Young, for so many years, going back to the 60s, when he was Dr. King's top assistant. Why not give it a shot? And so I put the request out there. Would you please write a blurb, a couple of sentences for Tell It True? And he wrote a full page that I was so touched and really blown away by it because it was so kind and so generous. And my publishers at Mercer Press said, we can't reduce this to a couple of sentences. This needs to be an afterword for the novel. So Andy Young's very generous comments are the afterword to the novel. And I think he said some awfully nice things about me, which I so greatly appreciate. But I think the key word that I bring forth in talking about that afterword was his remark that in his view, in his opinion, the men and women of the news media are the unsung heroes of the civil rights movement. And I frankly agree with him. And so that was terrific, meaningful, and I'm so grateful to Andy Young for doing that for me and my novel.
And tell us a little bit about, it's been a while since you published, the year. It's been a year since you were at the Atlanta History, or it was a history organization.
Atlanta History Center, the Carter Center, book clubs, book groups, civic groups, all over mainly the Southeast, Georgia, South Carolina in particular, a number of interviews. It's been a whirlwind year. I've made probably 70 appearances over the past 14 months. And I have to tell you, it's been exhilarating. Some people might say, you must be exhausted. And I said, well, it can be tiring, but I've loved virtually every minute of it because it's put me back among the viewers, the people. And I did a lot of speaking when I was active in journalism, but now I'm going back and not only talking about my career in journalism, but talking about the themes of the book. And I find there's great interest in it. So it's been wonderful. And it does continue. I mean, I'm still getting invitations and I hardly ever say no. So it's been great. And that's been one of the best things about writing the novel, aside from actually having it published in your hands, is the fact that you get to go out and talk about it. And the best thing is when people have actually read the novel and want to talk about the characters and the plot and why you did this and why you did that. So it's been a terrific experience.
Mm-hmm. Perfect segue. So Melissa, do you have a question for John about either something that happened in the novel or one of the characters in specifics?
Oh, I do. So as a military spouse myself, Evelyn was a very vivid character. You could just tell in life that they were most undoubtedly a power couple. and just Evelyn's effect on people around her. Can you talk about her a little bit?
Yes, and for those who haven't read the novel, in the first chapter of the novel, a former serviceman, fictional character, Jarvis Pendry, is murdered by Klansmen driving through Georgia in the dark of night after spending 2 weeks at Fort Benning for his reserve summer training. He was heading home to Baltimore to his wife, Evelyn, and their family. Evelyn is Jarvis Pendry's widow, who comes south to try to find out what happened to her husband, because initially he's missing. And then when she does find out that he has been the victim of racist violence, Klan violence, she undertakes a mission to galvanize the community, to use the force of her personality. And it is a very strong personality, although she's a very soft-spoken person. There is innate courage and dignity in everything she does. So she is a transformative figure in the novel. And through her charisma, her strength, her courage and resolve to come south, we have to remember this was Georgia in 1964. The Civil Rights Act had just been signed into law, and violence still reigned supreme in many parts of Georgia, particularly in rural Georgia. And so she provides the impetus for people to begin to reassess their thought processes, their prejudices. She doesn't completely cleanse the region, but she is so strong in the way she presents herself, the way she expresses herself, that she has impact on certain characters that you probably wouldn't think would change. But Sheriff McSwain, for example, who seems to be a hidebound racist, the typical South Georgia or rural Georgia sheriff, who has no regard for Black folk. He views them as very subservient, and he wants them to be responding to him. When he says jump, they should ask how high on the way up. And Evelyn Pendry is someone he hasn't encountered. He doesn't know how to deal with her. And over the course of the novel, and it takes the entire novel to begin to crack that prejudice that has dominated Sheriff McSwain's life for so long. And she tells him, you do not have to be a prisoner of your history, your background. People can change. And for those who haven't read the book, I'm sorry, it's a little bit of a plot spoiler because it's one of my favorite aspects of the book. And I would hope that those who read the book, although there's some very dark things in there and some violence, which is typical of that time, I like to believe it's an uplifting book, that it leaves the reader with the hope that people can change. And then we look at the record, over the past 50 years, and we see that people have changed. We've all changed in the way we look at life and other people who are different from us. So Evelyn is one of those transformative figures who helps that process along and tell it true.
Thank you so much for that. John, one of our most active members in our virtual book club is a lady named Shoshana, and she's in the Dallas area. She wanted to say congratulations on the afterword by Andrew Young. And her question is there's a couple segments to it. The first part is, during the 60s, was it true in Georgia that in capital cases, unsworn statements with no cross-examination of the defendants existed? Oof. It's a good
Yes,
question.
should I answer that one first?
Yes.
Yes, that is true. And that this is a part of the book. And this actually happened in the actual trial of the Klansman who killed Lemuel Penn, who was the actual murder victim. The case, my novel closely parallels the real life story of Lemuel Penn, although it's highly fictionalized. But in the trial of Lemuel Penn, the accused killers took the stand to deliver unsworn statements. Georgia at the time was the only state in the nation that allowed a defendant in a capital case, a case that could result in the death penalty, to take the stand and say virtually anything they wanted to. They could lie through their teeth No one could cross-examine them. They could make the statement and sit down. Unbelievable, but that's the law at the time. It changed several years after that. But at the time of the Lemuel Penn killing and the time that my novel deals with, the unsworn statement was a fact of life. And I'm glad you picked up on that. A lot of people ask me that question. Yes, it did exist.
That's amazing because you
Yeah.
think about it now. Anyway, it's we have a different justice system for sure. So
Thank goodness.
that moves on to the next part of her question was what did you learn about justice or injustice in Georgia and in the United States during your career? Goodness. And how did that possibly change your views? How did your views change if you ran into that?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it's a little difficult to answer because I grew up in the South. I grew up in the segregated South. I did not go to school with African Americans. I went to segregated schools. Even the college I attended in North Carolina was virtually segregated. And I'm thrust into covering the civil rights movement, coming from a relatively sequestered background. And I see the terrible misjustices, the discrimination that could never be defended in our free society with the Constitution, and all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator with unalienable rights, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. The hypocrisy of saying we're governed by this Declaration of Independence, and then what was actually happening to Black folk in Georgia and the South could not be defended. So, yes, in witnessing that as a newsman, covering the civil rights leaders who showed such enormous courage, and some of them gave their life and risked their life, and then covering those who were hidebound opponents to any civil rights progress, it definitely gave me a very strong feeling about the unfairness of the system in the South, segregation, the evils of it, and how it had to change. And anyone who could read history knew it could not last. It was on the way to being done away with. And it was a difficult process. Actually, in historical terms, it happened relatively quickly once things got moving. And for that, I give all the credit to the leaders of the movement, Dr. King, Andy Young, and so many others who were willing to make that step and risk their lives, and in some case, surrender their lives for a higher cause.
Thank you so much for that. With that, Melissa, do you have another question before we have John read us an excerpt, one of his favorite sections of the book?
Sure. So when I first encountered the title early on in the book, I thought, oh, that's where it came from. Then I realized, no, that I think maybe everyone has their truth. Is that true?
You're very perceptive, Melissa. Yes, the title hit me after a lot of study and agonizing over what do I call this book, and Tell It True seemed to ring very true because it can be interpreted so many ways. And if you read the novel, you will find different people of different persuasions using that term throughout the novel. Now, ostensibly, the news media folk, Gil Matthews, the television reporter, cameraman, and Mindy Williams, the young reporter for the AP, are telling it true by mainly reporting what's going on. That's how they tell it true. But there's so many others who feel like, their segregationist gubernatorial candidate, Roscoe Pike, with his racist invective, is telling it true. And they'll say, tell it true, Roscoe. Or the parishioners of Reverend Elijah Timmons, the civil rights leader, the African-American civil rights leader, who preaches, redemption and salvation and progress and the need for equal rights. Tell it true, Reverend, tell it true. So you're right, Melissa. Everybody has their own version of what the truth is, and it can change. And hopefully for many people, it will after they read Tell It True.
Thank you so much, John. So what are you going to read us tonight?
Well, first of all, I got to put on my reading glasses. Uh, there's so many vignettes in the novel uh, that I enjoyed writing, and this is one that I've had reaction to from a number of people who enjoyed it. It happens relatively late in the novel. A young civil rights firebrand named Marcus Turner loses his life in a civil rights protest. And he is funeralized in a small African American church in Atlanta. It's very packed. They can only let in one camera person, the pool coverage, you may know the term. It's Gil Matthews, my protagonist. And he's filming the service. And I've had people say they were moved by my description of that service. So I'm going to read this portion for you. As the last of the mourners file past the casket, the organ music faded slowly. The only sounds were the rustling of programs and an occasional cough. Most in the audience fanned themselves vigorously with the church-supplied hand fans adorned with the praying image of an Anglo-Saxon Jesus. A large woman wearing a deep purple robe stepped from the choir and walked to the center of the chancel. She looked out at the crowd, closed her eyes, and began to sing a cappella, her mellifluous tones enveloping the sanctuary. Swing low, sweet chariot, comin' for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, comin' for to carry me home. The congregation swayed from side to side, mouthing the words of the old spiritual, letting the singer give voice as she picked up the tempo and emotion. I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. The choir began to hum an accompaniment, and some in the audience sang softly with the soloist. The Turners stared straight ahead, tears streaking their cheeks. If you get there before I do, coming for to carry me home, tell all my friends I'm a-comin' too, comin' for to carry me home. Gil panned from face to glistening face, zooming in tight to show the tears when he saw them. Not only was he capturing the emotion, but he was also feeling it. It was impossible not to. The open expression of grief and joy, the intensity of feeling evoked by the beautiful music, the genuineness of celebrating faith and belief in the hereafter, all underscored for him the enduring customs of the Black religious tradition, that faith had always been the tie that bound them together as a people, from the fields and hovels of slavery to the cruel indignities of Jim Crow, to the campaign for equality in a Southland determined to deny it. How different, though, from his experience in the white establishment church, with its worship services that were formal, staid, doctrinaire, and distant. Just a little vignette late in the book that I enjoyed writing because I actually have covered a number of funerals similar to that. And I read that because several people have singled that out and mentioned they enjoyed that particular chapter. It's called Carry Me Home.
It was beautiful, so descriptive, and made me feel like I was there. And at that, after talking with you for almost a half hour already, that has flown by, I just want to kind of ask a question as a follow-up to this novel. We have come a long way in the country, but have we? And I find that that's a question that I think about a lot. I know that Melissa thinks about and works very hard in her poetry and her advocacy. John, do you think we've come a lot farther in our ability to accept all for who they are, or do you think we still have pockets of racism
Oh,
in the
I
country
think
in the
we
North
have.
South?
Yes, we haven't gotten there yet. You look at the civil rights era when things were actually easier to discern. The sides were very distinct, and where we had to go seemed very clear. Today, I think it's much more difficult, and the divisions still exist. In some cases, are exacerbated. So I think we obviously have come far in terms of racial reconciliation, but we're a long way from reaching that beloved community that Dr. King talked about. And my hope is that we can keep trying to build bridges, to talk to each other, to examine how we feel, and more importantly, examine how the other person feels. Try to walk a mile in the other person's shoes. But no, Susie, we're not there. We're a long way from there. It's a work in progress. I think it's a generational process. The challenges, new ones keep arising, and we just have to keep hoping that we'll continue on that upward trek toward the beloved community that I think we all would love to see.
Absolutely. Melissa, do you have a follow-up question?
The next thing I had was, like, in past reads, we had the perspective of an attorney, an FBI agent, and now yours, an incredible witness to history. So I so appreciate you writing this book, and sharing the information with your readers that you did.
Well, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the read. I hope those who have not read Tell It True will read it, because it's a book I believe in, and I will continue talking about it and promoting it, and hopefully the readership will continue to grow. The thought that's very attractive to me is that it will be on a lot of bookshelves. And maybe 10 years from now, 20 years from now, someone will pick it up and read it and be enlightened and illuminated about a period of history that I tried to recapture for better and not worse.
You did a wonderful job, John. And I have one closing question I'm going to squeeze in right before my deadline is, what is next, if anything, for you in the writing world?
Well, I'm considering another novel. Nothing definite yet. I'm in the formative stages, but I enjoyed the process so much, and I'd like to keep it going if possible.
That would be great.
Programs like this are so helpful to me because the feedback is wonderful, and you've both been great. And I hope the audience enjoyed the discussion. It's been great for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, and thank you, Melissa. We're going to let John go. If anybody wants to keep in touch with him, I know that he is active in our virtual book club on Facebook, and I know that you could probably reach through his website as well with any follow-up questions or conversations. And John, I'll see you in May for sure, if not April.
I'll be looking for you. It's johnpruittauthor.com, by the way. johnpruittauthor.com is the website. And Susie, I'll see you around. And Melissa, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Take care.
Have a good evening.
Bon voyage.
Bon voyage. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. So, Melissa, what'd you think?
Wow. Oh my goodness. It just wasn't hardly enough time, right? We just scratched the surface, but I hope that people have read the book or definitely will read it. And I feel like even though it is a novel, it historically, it could be a great resource because it does give such a vivid snapshot of that time in our history. So I am thrilled that you had it included in the lineup of our reads. So thank you.
I know. Well, I'm so glad that you joined me this evening because I just knew it was right up your alley. And I do hope that John blesses us with another work in the future. So everybody, speaking of the future, we've got a pretty good crowd tonight, and I just wanted to say Happy New Year to everyone. And I also wanted to let you know that the book club's going to look a little different over the next 4 months. Reason being, I will be on a cruise ship with Azamara Cruise Line starting tomorrow and going through the beginning of April. I can't promise having strong enough connectivity, and I have the keys to the StreamYard and wouldn't want to put that off on Melissa or Francine or Shoshana or someone else and have a stressful situation where we couldn't do a broadcast. So with that, for sure, I want everyone to remember that we are reading Donna Armour, her second novel that we featured in this virtual book club. Her new novel called it's just Red Starfish. So we're reading that in January with the hopes that I will have connectivity on the very first part of February. Melissa, I'll let you know the exact date when you can make my little graphic for me. Thank you. And we'll interview her. And then at that point, we're going to go into just a community chat conversation. What are you reading? Who do you like? Who do you recommend? I'm going to ask authors that we've featured in the past to maybe come on and just share what they're doing that day. Cute pictures of Dana riding our dog, Brody, I don't know, just to keep it going. As we know, if we don't post in a community group on Facebook, it kind of goes a very slow death, and we don't want that to happen. Because I do want to continue featuring authors, having authors refer us to future authors, and so on. And then I do know that we have been referred to Nancy Ritter, another author from Beaufort, and we will be featuring her probably in May and then interviewing her in June when we kick back off. But I do want to hear from Melissa to see what other ideas she might have for keeping our group going. It can look different. People can just take pictures of book covers and recommend it. And then I want to hear from everyone what you want the book club to look like over the next few months. Melissa, what do you think?
I'm going to throw into the hat an idea of one of my hometown libraries is doing like, what are you reading Wednesday? Since we don't have anything after Nancy's book assigned per se, we can kind of throw it out there like, what are you reading Wednesday? Maybe.
That's a good idea. Because I have absolutely loved every minute of my virtual book club, and I let it take a life of its own in the sense that I remember the only decision I ever made on who we were going to feature was when Becky Bruff gave me a couple of names. And of course I picked Jeffrey Blunt, and oof, that was a home run, our very second featured author. He does have another novel out there, so we could see if he wants to participate again. But I've let it take a life of its own, and I kind of want to learn from the group and read something different. I have to be able to download it on Amazon while I'm at sea or in port, though. But everybody, just let me know how you want, what you think things should look like. And everyone, please follow the authors on their Amazon's accounts. Please write reviews, especially for all of those that we've featured before. It truly makes a difference in their success as an author and in the sales of their books. And somebody said, please get Jeffrey Blunt back. Yes, with his new book. I've had a conversation. So yes, we'll talk about that later in the summer for sure. Melissa, did you have any other ideas or suggestions before we sign off tonight?
That was my one light bulb moment for tonight. So, but if something else comes about, then I absolutely will share it.
Yeah. And just reconfirming with everyone that the community is there as a community, and feel free to post anything appropriate, obviously, around reading and or travel, let's say. No, I'm just kidding. But Melissa, thank you so much for helping me with the virtual book club and helping me with reminders or what date we're going to meet with such author and that kind of thing. Doing this total as a volunteer can be overwhelming at times, but we want to keep the community going. Thank you for your help and support. And all you guys, bon voyage. Thanks, Melissa. Gonna sign off now. Good night, everybody.